Ancient Babylonian Lawsuit Relating to a Hebrew. Translated by Dr. Opert. Taken from Readings in Ancient History, Greece and the East, Volume 1. By William Stearns Davis. Having worked for more than 25 years at the Babylonian and Assyrian deeds of contract and legal decisions, and having explained the documents relating to these subjects, which have been discovered in what was once ancient Mesopotamia, I am now able to state that the meaning of these difficult texts is at length fairly well understood by us. The simplest explanation is that which is the most difficult to obtain, and I have no doubt that the translations and interpretations I offer will appear to many scholars so easy and conclusive as to make them assume that anyone might have discovered them at the outset. Fortunately, however, not only the translations of other scholars, but my own imperfect ones as well, have been published, and thus will convince younger students of the immense difficulty there is in arriving at results which seem so evident. The first text which I have selected contains certain contracts and legal decisions relating, indubitably, to captive Jews, or Hebrews, who had been carried to Babylon after the destruction of Jerusalem. One of the most interesting of them is a lawsuit commenced by a Jewish slave by the name of Barachiel in order to recover his original status. The case was as follows. Barachiel, who bears the same name as the father of Elihu in the book of Job, had been the property of a wealthy person named Akinuri, who had sold him to a widow by the name of Gaga at about 570 BC. He remained in the house of this lady as a slave, with the power of liberating himself by paying a sum equal to his purchase, or private property, which he had been allowed to acquire, like a slave, in ancient Rome. But it seems that he was never fortunate enough to be able to afford the sum of money required. He remained with Gaga 21 years, and was considered the property of the house, and as such was handed over in pledge, was restored, and finally became the dowry of Nubta, the daughter of Gaga. Nubta gave him to her son and husband in exchange for a house and some slaves. After the death of the two ladies, he was sold to the wealthy publican Iti Marduk Balad, from whose house he escaped twice. Taken the second time, he instituted an action in order that he might be recognized as a freeborn citizen of the family of Belrimani, and to prove that he was of noble origin, he pretended that he had performed the matrimonial ceremonies at the marriage of his master's daughter, Kudasu, with a certain Samas Madamik. Such a performance, doubtless, implied that the officiating priest was of free birth and that no slave or freed man was qualified to take part in it. He declared, "I am Marbant, or descendant of a Banu," literally a generator or ancestor, one of those semi-mythical heroes who gave their names to the noble families of Babylon. "I belong," he went on to say, "to the family of Belrimani, who in other texts is called a high priest." The case was brought before a court of justice, and the royal judges asked Barachiel to prove that he was of free birth. This action was urged for and against, and eventually Barachiel, knowing that the game was up, so to speak, was obliged to retract his former statements. He was unable to rebut the evidence alleged against him, and though it is probable that the two married persons whose hands he had joined were dead, other witnesses came forward who proved that he was a slave with the power of purchasing his freedom. The exact date at which the judgment was delivered is not quite certain, but it must be later than the 7th year of Nabonidus, when the father, Iti Marduk Balad, was still alive. I will now proceed to make some further remarks on the details of the case, as it is very interesting and offers some useful hints as to the legal procedure of the Babylonians. The name of Barachiel, or Barakai Eli, is evidently that of a Jew, or a Hebrew. He is called a slave of ransom, that is to say, not a slave who has already purchased his freedom, since in this case he would have been free, but a slave who was allowed by special laws to employ his private fortune in the work of liberating himself. He professes to have been a person who took place in joining the hands of the bride and bridegroom at a wedding, which must have taken place before the 35th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, when he still belonged to the house of Akinuri, the seller of the slave, as he is called at the end of the text. After the declaration of the slave, the document is comparatively easy to understand. The judges, after pursuing all evidence, do not find any proofs that Barachiel was a man of free birth, and accordingly say to him, "Prove to us that you are a descendant of a noble ancestor." Thereupon, Barachiel confesses that he is not freeborn, but has twice run away from the house of his master. As, however, the act was seen by many people, he was afraid, and said, "I am the son of a noble ancestor, but I am not freeborn," he continues, and then gives an account of the events of his life. The words Marbenut in line 16 of what I am reading, which I will also provide a link for below. The phrase condition of being a freeborn citizen, and not letter of clientship, as Dr. Pizer supposes, the expression letter of citizenship, Dipimar Benut, occurs several times and signifies the warrant given by a master to his emancipated slave. Non-citizenship was the fourth fact guaranteed by the seller of a slave to the purchaser, the other three being that the slave should not rebel or run away. If he returned to his former master, he was to be sent back. Number 2, that no claim should lie against the validity of the sale on the account of technical or other errors. And finally, number 3, that the purchaser should be secured against any claim made upon the services of a slave by a royal officer. Barachiel adds that after the death of 2 ladies, Gaga and Nupta, he was sold for money to Idi Marduk Balad of the Egabai family, thus becoming a servus redimendus argento, a slave who could be ransomed with money, and that he awaits the sentence of the court. The judges decided that Barachiel should be restored to his original status, and added that it was in the azuz, or the original contract of the 2 married persons, Samas Madamik and Kudasu, that the judgment was pronounced. This may signify absence, that the 2 having died during the interval of more than 20 years, which had elapsed since the marriage. It is probable that Barachiel had invented the story of his taking part in the wedding because he thought that its falsity could not be detected. If, however, the word is equivalent to the expression ina duzu, the text from Sipora would go to show that it must mean in the presence of. It may be remarked that not a word is said about a deed of slavery, which was certainly not given to a slave in order to prove his own servile condition, as a vindix libertatis, as Dr. Revelout seems to imagine. The only penalty imposed upon the slave is his restoration to his ancient condition. Penalties were decreed against those who wished to annul a contract, not against those who pretended to be free citizens. In this respect, the Babylonian law was more humane than the Roman law. This is more surprising, since it cannot be denied that severe penalties were at times inflicted. Some examples remain inscribed in the 12th century before our era, threaten the transgressors of a contract and those who annul their covenants with the curses of the gods, each of whom would inflict a special punishment. The old Jew escaped with the failure of his attempt to recover his undeserved loss of liberty. Perhaps the court took this into serious consideration, his fidelity to his former master, who had esteemed him to be worth not only a house, but other slaves as well. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed this. This was taken from Readings in Ancient History, Volume 1, Greece and the East, by William Stearns Davis, Professor of Ancient History in the University of Minnesota, published in 1912. I think that you will find this to be incredibly interesting. I know that I did as well. I highly recommend checking out the links in the video description below, as it will send you to a variety of primary sources relating to ancient history, and not just Greece, but throughout the ancient Near East. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful night. I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and this is the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages.